Welcome to the Happy Doc, the voice of fulfilled physicians. This show is about bringing inspirational, creative, successful, and happy health professionals to you. Get ready to learn how you can be a happy doctor too. Hello, Happy Doc family, and welcome to the Happy Doc. This is your host, Dr. Taylor Brana. And as always, I'm super excited for this episode. You guys are going to learn a lot, as I did. And before we introduce our next guest, I want to mention the point of our podcast, website, YouTube channel, and more. We are on a mission to create a happier medical culture. And the way that we're going to do that is by learning from people who are doing it right, creating this mentor platform that brings on awesome people, and learning the tips that allow us to feel fulfilled in our lives. The way we're learning is through multiple avenues. We have the podcast, we have the website and blog posts, and we're creating more and more content. So please follow us on our social media handles. The handles are at Happy Doc Podcast, and you can find that on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can also search Happy Doc TV. And we love what we're doing. We're super excited, and it's a great mission to be a part of. So please check us out. Our next guest is going to be emergency medicine physician, Dr. Dara Kass. And before we begin this episode, there's a few links I want you to be aware of. Their Twitter is at Dara Kass. That's her personal Twitter, and her website is FemInEM&nbsp, and their Twitter account is at FemInEM&nbsp. We're going to learn all about her organization and what they are up to. She is an inspirational, energetic physician on a mission, and you're going to learn about her mission. You're going to learn about her website. You're going to learn about her organization, and I learned so much from this conversation. The number one takeaway I want you guys to always realize when it comes to our work is that medicine is not a form of slavery. It is an investment. And if we think about it as an investment for our future and creating opportunities, it is going to be a lot easier for us. And I think we're going to really highlight that in this conversation. So without further ado, let's start the episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Happy Doc. Super pumped, excited. We have an amazing guest for today. This is Dr. Dara Kass, an emergency medicine doctor, also CEO and founder of FemInEM. We're going to learn all about it in this episode. Let's do it. Dr. Dara Kass, can you introduce yourself?
I think you just introduced me.
Perfect.
And I love it.
All right, first question, right off the bat. Any relation to M&M and FemInEM?
So you're the first person to ask that, and I love it. So it's actually a funny story, because there's always a funny story.
Yes.
So when we were thinking of the name for FemInEM, which stands for Women or Fem in Emergency Medicine, and we thought of a million variations on women, emergency medicine. We had she in the ED. We had all these other ideas, but FemInEM was perfect, right? So when you're starting a website, and which is the core of what FemInEM started as, you need to have a domain name, and you have to register that, and you have to get it. So I tried to do FemInEM.com. Well, FemInEM.com is actually owned by somebody that hates Eminem the rapper, right?
Okay, go on.
It's literally F Eminem.
Oh my gosh.
And so I was like, but they weren't using it. It hadn't been used in like 5 or 6 years or something. So I went to them on Twitter, because also the Twitter handle at FemInEM is the same kind of group. And I said, can I buy it from you? Like, please, it's worth like $12, right? Whatever. Yeah. And they were like, no, we need it.
Wow.
We will hold on to our archive of information. And so we became FemInEM.org because of that.
Oh my gosh. So the FemInEM, the F Eminem haters were so they wanted it so bad that they could not give up their name. Oh my
right.
God. That's
to a mission-based organization for women in medicine. Like, it was amazing. But to each his own, and they were there first. So we solved our problem like we do. And we figured that being an org anyway was more, respectable or something.
Sure. Wow. I love that to start us off. Awesome. So let's jump right in. So you're in emergency medicine. You've been doing this for how long?
Emergency medicine or FemInEM?
Well, emergency medicine first.
So I graduated from residency in 2007. I graduated from medical school in 2003.
Wow.
And it makes me 40, which I will admit out loud now.
All right. You admitted it. Great. So you've been in the process for a little bit, and you started FemInEM when?
So we launched FemInEM on my birthday in 2015. So it was September 6th, 2015. And we really launched it just to be a clearinghouse around issues surrounding women in medicine, specifically emergency medicine. Figuring we'd have like a blog and we'd have like a way that mentors and mentees could find each other and just a way to connect.
Yeah.
We actually didn't realize the timing because not only when we started the website, it was almost the same time that a lot of these like Facebook really launched its groups app.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the same time we launched FemInEM, a lot of the Facebook groups exploded.
Right.
And that paired social media platform implementation allowed us to really facilitate conversations and connections while also having a place to put content.
I love that. And we could talk about that for a while. There's so many opportunities on social media right now. It's crazy. So let's go rewind a little bit. So what got you inspired initially? You went through the process of going into emergency medicine. What was the impetus of creating an organization like this?
So most of my career before FemInEM had been in education, specifically, resident and medical student mentorship, mm-hmm. education, curriculum development. And a lot of it was related to the use of social media and kind of digital platforms in supplementing education. So mm-hmm. things like blogs and podcasts for education, using Twitter we have a thing in emergency medicine, FOAM, right? Free open access medical education. And that's kind of disseminated to most other specialties. And so we were kind of the pioneers in using education and social media together to cut the knowledge translation gap, wow. right? So a friend of mine has a podcast that talks about cutting knowledge translation from 17 years to, less than a year. And so we're doing that in the education world, but we weren't doing it in the professional development world, right? So I would go to meetings, and much like a lot of other people, when we got together in real life, we realized that we had similar issues. Right. And we were talking about things like, how do we do our maternity leaves, or how do you transition in and out of academics when you're going on a period of leave for 3 months to have a kid, or, how to get promoted, or gender gaps and everything. And I was like, wait, we have this really quick, rapid, connected situation in education, and we're not doing it for ourselves interpersonally. Yeah. Right. So how can we fix that? Yeah. And starting a blog was the first step. And then the thing about the blog is that platform has allowed us to continue to add on layers. As we find problems, we can actually solve them almost instantaneously if the platform allows it. And so that's where it came from. Yeah. Kind of a need we'd solved in education that we thought we needed to solve for ourselves. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where we are now.
So to summarize a little bit, so this website brings together, is it just emergency medicine doctors, or is it?
So the website, it was started for emergency medicine because those are my people, that's my jam. Right. And the truth is that it's extraordinarily applicable outside of emergency medicine, and actually outside of women, outside of doctors. Like, you don't have to be all so for women in emergency medicine as physicians. Yeah. Any aspect of that, if you identify with one or none of all those words, you can find something. Sure. And so plenty of, kind of cisgender, heterosexual male physicians in surgery still find something. Yeah. That's okay. Great. Okay. So anyone can go onto your website, find something that they really interests them. So you go onto the website. Initially, it started, you had this basis in education. You realized there was a way to connect in terms of professional problems and issues, and you're able to solve those problems with something like a blog post, and then you can disseminate that information online, right? And you're able to kind of give that answer to lots of people at one time. Correct? Just to summarize? Yes. Awesome. Beautiful. So now it's developed over time, and something you had mentioned to me when we spoke earlier was this conference coming up and your thoughts about connection. Can we touch on that? Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. So tell me more. So the core aspect of FemInEM was to connect people that were otherwise not located in time and space. Yeah. And originally that was about mentorship and sponsorship and answers to questions you had, because if you look at the core of the human aspect of medicine and the problems we're having, right?
Yeah.
It's about being disconnected, which is ironic because we have all these platforms that can connect us in ways we'd never been connected before.
Yeah.
And so that's really the problem we were solving like described in a new way.
Yeah.
After about 2 years, a year and a half of having FemInEM and having all these kind of virtual relationships, I was in a room at a different conference that was magical and I was loving it. And I was like, wait, this is awesome. Can we do this? Can we bring together, hundreds of women, but people around this topic and put them in the same space? And would that supplement what we've done kind of online?
Yeah.
And so we envisioned a little over 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, about putting together our first conference for women in medicine called the FemInEM Idea Exchange, modeled after many of the great conferences we'd been to. And that was a raging success. And when you talk about being happy and fulfilled as a physician, which is what I really want to talk about with you.
Yeah.
There is a huge space for interpersonal connectedness, which includes virtual connectedness, like social media, and then supplemented by true, actual, in-person, real-life connectedness.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I actually listened to a talk recently, and they said, and this is across the board, it's not just with physicians, like the number one issue with modern society is we're, quote, more connected, but we're more lonely because we don't have these physical connections in person. And another book I read, it was like by the Dalai Lama, but they had some research backed by it. And it said that the closest amount of friendships people have gone from 3 close friends or best friends you can confide in, like on average, to 2 people. So we've gone and been more connected, but we've lost the ability to have that really close relationship, like deep connection with we've lost one. We're down to 2 people, like as a society, which is totally crazy. And that's why I absolutely love like creating the gap between digital to physical connections. That's awesome. So yeah, tell me more about your story in terms of, I'm sure you encounter lots of people that are burnt out, exhausted, and as I'm speaking to you, you have a lot of energy. So kind of, what do you tell people like that, or how do you inspire them?
So I think that the first reason most people are burnt out and exhausted is I explained this, I think, to somebody else another day. Medicine itself has gone away from the reasons we went into medicine, right? So things like the digital platforms for the EMR and the number of patients we need to see and the inability to control your schedule and not feeling like you're in charge of your own destiny. Like there's so many aspects of medicine that are frustrating. And, a lot of that has to do with a lot of healthcare, the infrastructure of healthcare and how we look at it as a consumable or as a consumer-based product and market-based economics. And so that's kind of that you have to accept that as the framework under which we work. But the problem is that being a doctor is not the same thing as working at a auto body shop or even working at a hedge fund, right? There's a need to be emotionally present for your patients that requires you to have that is exhausting at the rate by which we would make cars or even trade stocks.
Sure.
And so the idea is that you need to first find out how much of that can you do and still be full, right? So I know as a doctor and in emergency medicine, I'm happiest as a doctor when I work in the ER 1 to 2 days a week. Now, that sounds really privileged to say I only want to work in the ER 1 to 2 days a week. But what that really meant for me as a physician was I needed to look at the landscape of opportunities in emergency medicine and find other opportunities by which I could be a doctor and still make money, right? And not be in the ER seeing patient after patient after patient, right?
Yeah.
So that's part of what FemInEM represents for me is the ability to still be engaged as a physician, as a business owner, but also not have to do the thing that is exhausting to me.
Yeah.
And there are actually a lot of ways to do that in medicine now. And so what I find when I speak to people who are doing this is it's the enlightenment that there are a lot of ways to be a doctor, not just the way that it was for our parents, that informs them of potential happiness. And so if you go back to the conference, a lot of what we talk about is the ways I am an ER doctor right? So I am an ER doctor. Like we have a woman who's a coroner, right? Now in Canada, you can be a coroner if you're an emergency medicine doctor. Now it is not as exhausting to do 2 shifts a week as a coroner and an ER doctor, right? Somebody runs the psych division of her psych ER administratively. So she works in the ER and does that.
Yeah.
There are so many ways. I work as a camp doctor, right? I'm a doctor in my kids' sleepaway camp.
Yeah.
And that is a space. Now, if you do that with your vacation time, that's not great. But if you do it, if you can somehow carve out that time in your life that isn't taking away from the other resting you would normally do. So a lot of what FemInEM represents in the conference, in the real life part of it, is to remind people that there's telemedicine and there are consulting gigs and there are so many ways, but you also want to remind people that being in the emergency department for us is core to who we are.
Right.
And you don't have to cut that off at the knees.
Yeah.
You can kind of include that in your algorithm.
I love what you just said. And I think, I'm a resident, right? So right now I'm constrained by certain rules, regulations, education, but it feels so good to me to know that there's these opportunities out there and like to see you living that, and carving that out. That's awesome. So thank you for inspiring me personally. The one,
welcome.
Yeah, no, it's great. And so the one thing that, I was listening to you and it's coming up for me a little bit is I feel like people in medicine often, we've gone through this process where we like have a very rigid schedule and we have to work really hard all the time and we have to exhaust ourselves. But you're saying like know yourself, understand your boundaries, carve out times that make sense for you, create your energy. It's like very different. So, some people are going to have a hard time like switching over to that mindset. What was it like for you, or can you comment on kind of switching into that type of thinking?
So I will. Okay. So I will. So it's literally a detox process, right? And I don't mean that casually, but I want to kind of step back and say that I say this now, having graduated from residency in 2007.
Yeah.
And I think that in order to be the kind of physician that can work 1 or 2 days a week in the ER, you have to go through the 10 years of not being casual with it. So
right.
I want that to be understood, because I think that there is a time when you can immerse yourself in your job and work all the time, every day. And that's residency. And it's important.
Yeah.
I believe in the value of residency as a educational product and as the foundation for allowing us the freedoms to have later on. And I think that if we looked at residency as an investment in our options later, instead of as an indentured servitude, to a system, then I think that it would be easier to get through residency.
Yeah. Wow.
Because I think residency is, and I think that I'm particularly vulnerable to this conversation right now because we have an epidemic of women physicians specifically in residency not understanding their options.
Wow.
And I think that when you're, I don't know why there's such a gendered aspect to this. It's something that we're going to look into a lot. And I think that, we know that women physicians are twice as likely to actually commit suicide than their age-matched cohort that are not physicians. And
wow.
I think that's probably going up. And so I want to caveat what I'm saying right now about where I am right now in my life as a 40-year-old mother of 3 who started a business and works in the ER and has found my balance, as I don't expect somebody who's 22 or 27 who's in residency, who's slogging it away, who's arguably potentially feeling they're being, either maltreated or overworked or whatever it is. I don't want that person to look and say, why don't I have these options? What I want them to understand is that the investment in their time and space in an appropriate environment will get them those options later on.
I love what you just said. That was awesome. Thank you. Yeah. And what I think was so great about that, I mean, I can even give an example. Obviously, I'm not going to give too much detail, but like yesterday, I stayed a little bit later, had an opportunity to see a case with a rare disease that just happened to be there. And like, you can't make that up. There's no other way I would have learned that. And, a culmination of, these X amount of years doing something, you gain skills, you see things that, otherwise you'd never have that opportunity. And that allows you to, obviously, like for you come into the ED, you have like a skill set, what's going on, you have a sense of things, and you can only develop that over time. And I love that like investment mindset as opposed to the servitude mindset, because I think, often that's the thinking for sure. And I know I've been exhausted and been there too. So it's like, preaching to the choir here. I've definitely felt like that. So no, that's a great point of view. Oh, I love that. Okay. So you mentioned some options that people can develop. What are some interesting options that you've kind of heard of, or things that you can do besides just medicine, the medicine, and what else?
So I think that it's very specific to your specialty. And I think that, look, I am not I don't want to undervalue the aspect of being a clinician and seeing patients all the time. And I think there's a lot of people that's a great option for. And I think that also the business of medicine has created a lot of structures that I'm not even familiar with in other specialties, right?
Sure.
And I do think that when you go into a specialty and you think about it as a small business, you have to understand that you're becoming a business owner and you're becoming a doctor. And not everybody who became a doctor wants to own their own small business.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the algorithm. I think that a lot of it. So when I said to you about like how do I go from being a full-time kind of academic physician to what I'm doing now with the detox program, it's true for everything, right? So I went kind of full-time to part-time to per diem, which means that I had no job protection and I didn't have any benefits, but I'm an ER doctor. We're in pretty high demand. Yeah. And now I'm going back to a different job where I'm going to be part-time again. So I'm going to have a little more commitment to the department. And for that, I'm going to get a little more sense of belonging, whatever that's worth. You can do that in the space of working as a consultant, for industry. Now, there needs to be a lack of shame, I think, as physicians in partnering with places like industry in the right way. So one of the things that I like to remind people of is there's no being profitable or doing a job that is profitable is not shameful in medicine, right? We have this very altruistic perspective on medicine that it has to be all about us giving, right? We have to go and save the patients and do our thing. And now at the core of what we do as doctors, we are lifesavers in every special, whatever you do, right? And we go because we care about the patients. Nobody goes to work as a doctor to do a bad job, to see a bad outcome. Like that's not who we are. We've invested ourselves and our energy and our hearts and souls in what we do. Having that said, there is nothing shameful about finding a balance in your life that includes altruistic human care, maybe even serving, like you're going to be a psychiatrist, right? So doing half job at the VA. We literally, the veterans need excellent psychiatrists, almost more than they need anything else. We know that, right? But if you married that with a consulting job as a part-time person, where you were able to do consulting work, I don't care for who. It could be concierge consulting work because there are lots of people who have, ability to support a concierge service that need really good psychiatrists too. Yeah. Right. And so it's about finding the balance that makes you feel full and justified in your education and your value, but also gives you the options you need as a physician. And so I think that a lot of it is this unpacking of the shame that we feel as doctors. That we're choosing paths that make our lives a little bit easier and actually tolerable. Because I think that the rest of society has figured that out and we didn't. And so that's kind of, it's permission. It's permission to, as women, it's permission to, have a schedule that allows you to go to your kids' after school projects and not act like you're asking for permission to do that, but you're asking permission to have that be a priority. Do you see the difference?
Yeah, 100%.
And that's for men too, right? One of the things we talk about a lot on FemInEM is the lack of permission men have to admit that their families are important to them.
Wow.
Think about it. When's last you had a male attending who took paternity leave?
Yeah. No, that's so true. Obviously the focus is on women, but that's definitely really powerful.
So we know based on really good data that the more men who take paternity leave, it makes it possible for women to take maternity leave without penalty.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
That men who take paternity leave beyond a certain period of time see the same penalties women do. So they don't.
Wow.
Right? So these are all the aspects of like the permissions and the movement and the stuff that we're doing and how it kind of all comes together.
Yeah. There's so many good points you just said. I'm trying to think of what I would want to ask you about.
I'm sorry.
No. I loved it. It was great. So one thing actually that resonated for me personally was the permission part because, for me, besides just medicine, I have a lot of creative outlets, things I want to do, right? And a big thing we talk about, in our conversations is you come in with medicine like you did archery before, or you wrote novels, or you were a poet, or you made music, and then you come into school and then you just kind of like lose that part of yourself. And so one of the things I want to do is I want to do like blog writing or a podcast or videos and all those things. And I felt like I wasn't allowed to do that as a student. I felt like I wasn't allowed to do that as, resident. And someone literally said, like, Taylor, it was another doctor. And she said, Taylor, you're allowed. I give you permission to make your blog. I give you permission to write, like, to do your podcast or whatever you want to do. And it was so dumb, but like, it was that little sentence that changed it for me. I was like, you know what? You're so right. Why can't I do it? And yeah.
No, and I think that that's really important. I think that it comes down to, like I said, when you're a resident, if whatever hobbies you, that make you feel good. So when I was a resident, I had a friend who had season tickets to the Knicks. Now, we could talk a lot about the Knicks now, 15 years later, but he was like the biggest Knicks fan.
Yeah.
And he had to go to like every game. Like it was a thing for him, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's expensive, like a commitment. But it turns out there's a lot of basketball games, right? And that was his thing. But if he went to the Knicks games, he felt good and he was whole, and that's what it is.
Yeah.
It is really important that we give everybody permission to do the thing that makes them feel like full, right?
Yeah.
Fill your tank with something. If for you it's blogging and podcasting, that's great.
Yeah.
As a resident, there is some delayed gratification in residency where you don't have all the time and energy to 100%. Do what you need to do, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there is this, and I'm like a pseudo millennial, right? I'm 40 years old, but I live this very millennial life.
Yeah.
And so there is all of us have gotten worse at delayed gratification, right? Sure. It's part of social media, it's part of the phones, it's part of the ability to, the internet moves everything so quickly. So I think that it's not always going to be possible for you to have your full big hobby as a resident. But it is interesting. A lot of the people who lecture new attendings on money acknowledge that it is okay to take your new salary and spend it on the one thing you've been waiting for that makes you feel valuable. Not everything.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you're somebody that loves cars, and you're a resident driving a Honda Civic, which is a fine automobile, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But you want to get a Maserati, right? Sure. Or whatever it is. And you get your first check and you go out and you lease your Maserati. That's fine. As long as driving your Maserati makes you feel full and happy, and then you go back to your work as a doctor. You can't get the Maserati, the new car, go on vacation, the new house and all that other stuff. So if it's for you a blog and podcast and that takes time and energy for you, do it.
Yeah.
But put it into context. You don't want your hobby to take away from your real job.
100%.
But that's totally fine.
Yeah, I love that. So we're talking about a little bit about like building a skill or like, for me it's podcasting. Maybe it's, buying a car for someone else. But you're in a different perspective now where you've kind of built out a community. You've been able to connect with a lot of people. You have your own podcast as well, and you're doing lots of stuff. So, what are some looking back? What are some skills or things you wish you had checked out maybe a little bit sooner? Something you would want to tell to people that are earlier in the process.
I think it's the idea that you're investing in yourself. That actually probably is the thing that I would say to myself early on, is to not be resentful of what's being taken from me in an infrastructure that's somehow, because there will be more time, right? So I was somebody that went from college to medical school to residency to I had a baby 4 months after I graduated from residency.
Wow.
I was very linear in my ambition.
Yeah.
Because that's what I was supposed to do. And in all fairness, that's afforded me optionality later on in life that
Sure.
I wouldn't have had if things were a little further behind.
Sure.
But at the time, I didn't view it as investing in my future. I viewed it as having to get everything done right now. My husband uses this term preserving optionality, which means that you don't cut off your options so that you can have them later on.
Sure.
And that's an interesting idea. I think that when I was a resident and I wasn't hanging out with my friends from college because they were going out for the, to the beach for the weekends and I was on call for surgery, whatever it was, I resented my life. And I spent a lot of energy resenting that, even though there were going to be plenty more weekends at the beach and there were going to be lots of time to live.
Yeah.
And because I wasn't in that moment where I wanted to be the most, right? If I could go back to myself then and say, listen, when you're 40, you're going to have a career that's validating. You're going to be changing the world for this little microcosm of space that you live in. You're going to have 3 amazing kids, a great husband, and you're basically going to have everything you ever wanted. Calm down.
Yeah.
that would be pretty powerful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, right. Let's get a time machine and warp back and tell us how amazing our lives are going to be. But no, that's, and I love what you just said, because like, even, for me or any listener out there, there's going to be so many times, like we didn't choose an easy field, right? Like we went into a field that like we are dedicated, we have set hours, and that's a huge challenge. I think about all my friends that are, you literally said like going out on the weekends, and I'm like, well, I'm here on the weekend and I'm working, and yeah, it's hard. And so I think, what you just said is going to touch a lot of people, and investing, in that bigger future later. It's such a delayed gratitude, but you're so right. That's a really great point. Wow.
I think it's also remembering, and I think this is true a lot for people that are new parents as residents or new attendings. It is really hard to be a resident. It's also really hard to be a new parent. That's just true.
Yeah.
It's harder to be a new parent actually sometimes than it is to be a resident. When you put them together, it's a recipe for, there's no other word sometimes, but you're, right. But you're also, in 5 years, you're going to have a 5-year-old. You're going to have gone through residency. You're going to have gotten through your job. You're going to have, and then you have this magical child that you gave birth to or helped create or whatever you want to talk about. And you look back and you're like, if I didn't do it then, I wouldn't be where I am now.
Yeah.
And that's true for all this. And so I think that, that's the gift that I would have given my younger self. I wouldn't talk about how to build a business or how to like connect on social media. Like that stuff will come to anybody anytime they want it.
Yeah.
But the perspective that it's not it's a marathon, not a sprint. And that's about life. That's about residency. That's about doctoring, parenthood, wherever you want to put it.
Yeah.
And so just remember that, because I feel like, especially when you're in the throes of residency and when you're in the throes of disconnectedness, and you're like, and we talk about women a lot and the emotional housework they do at work and at home and the unpaid labor of parenthood and all these other things. Like those are the moments that you don't realize there will be another side.
Yeah. Wow. So let's talk about women for a second. It's not it's not my side of things, and you're going to be like the specialist in that area a little bit, right? So
well, you've met a few women, I'm assuming.
Say again.
You've met a few women in your life.
I think so. I'm gonna have to. Okay. I'm gonna have to look back in my journal. I'll have to go back.
Yeah, I met a lady.
No, of course. So, but there's specific challenges that I'm not going to personally face, right? And so, can we talk about that? The life as a resident, the life as an attending. What are some challenges you think women face, and what are some tips you'd give them?
So I think that there are kind of work. And I hate the term work life, but there are work challenges and life challenges, and they're different, and they're real. So I think that women residents definitively face both unconscious bias, overt sexism, and benevolent sexism, right? All those things. So the unconscious bias happens all the time. People don't realize it. They make comments. It's unconscious, right? And we talk about those things a lot, and having to do with whether or not your gut is to promote somebody that's a woman or a man, or whether or not they get automatically selected for something, whatever. Wow. Then there's the overt sexism, which happens in the throes of weakness. And by that, I mean when the person who's being sexist is weak. So whether that's a power differential, or if it's in the middle of an operating room and the patient's unconscious and somebody makes a comment or brushes up against you. I mean, we know that, we're finally talking about these aspects that have happened for years, especially in the surgical field, but certainly everywhere. And so that happens to women all the time.
Right.
Then you have the benevolent sexism, which is that here's a patient. So a good example would be in psychiatry, right?
Sure.
You have a patient who had a nervous breakdown because she lost a child, right? Now, as a psychiatry resident, both men and women residents need to understand how to speak to somebody who had is dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder from any experience.
Yeah.
But the minute that experience is gendered, they give it to the gendered physician.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And they think it's better for the patient, but they also think it's better for the physician, and it's not, right? So when I have a gift, I have experience talking to young women who are going through early, pregnancy losses in the emergency department, because I lived that experience with my friends, with my family, and I connect them differently. I know that.
Yeah.
So there is a place for you to choose to have an effective relationship with a patient in that moment. But in education, every physician needs to learn how to have those conversations.
Yeah.
And that's benevolent sexism. And it happens to residents, and it happens both to men and women residents.
Mm-hmm.
So those are kind of the workplace issues. And then you have the other issues, right? Which are, there are a lot of women, medical students, residents, and attendings who come from families that have expectations of them because they're women, and many that are men. And those expectations haven't changed even in the face of them becoming doctors.
Sure.
Or the expectations are additional. So there are a lot of women who are breadwinners for their family, who are, their spouses, because of the way physicians get paid in society.
Yeah.
They're also responsible for the major debt that their family has because of the way physicians are made in society.
Yeah.
And then they're also the only partner in the family with a uterus, right?
Yeah.
And so you have all those expectations on one person. That's a lot.
That is a lot. Wow.
And so that goes back to the interconnectedness and the aspects of what FemInEM started as. It was to say to people, we know this is happening to you. We know you can't control it. We're going to be here for you while you're figuring out how it's going. We're going to share how we've survived it. And we're going to figure out what we can offload. Yeah. So one of the first conversations we had on FemInEM was about having stay-at-home partners. Because plenty of women physicians have stay-at-home partners, just like for generations, plenty of men had stay-at-home partners.
Sure, yeah.
And understanding how does that actually happen on an execution basis when your relationship has other gendered norms, like masculinity and respect and, deference. And I don't mean that because those are truths.
Yeah, 100%.
You can act like they're not. Right? We can say, okay, well, if I'm the breadwinner, I make the decisions, you have to change the kids and you have to take care of it. But there becomes this undercurrent of hostility in relationships that don't acknowledge that those relationships go against our social norms, at least for now.
Yeah. Wow, I love that. And I'm assuming a lot of these topics you guys talk about in your blog posts and in your podcast episodes. And is there a resource section or something like almost like a question and answer kind of thing, or? So
we have the website has like a resources and library section, which is usually just papers that we refer to that have like kind of information for people. If you tweet to us or if you just tag FemInEM tweets on anything on Twitter, that allows a conversation to develop around an issue. Yeah. And if anybody ever wants to be on the podcast or talk about an issue, so our podcast is very much about deeper conversations around issues related to gender, race, kind of any intersectional issue in medicine. So this week we spoke about research for gun violence, or before that we spoke about maternal health outcomes for women of color. Right. But we've also talked about salary disparities. And so those conversations aren't so good on a superficial level. You want to go a little deeper. Yeah. And that's what the podcast allows us to do. I love that. And the reason I'm asking is I'm sure there's going to be females in medicine listening to this, and they're going to want, to have that resource out there. And it's definitely not a topic that we kind of dig into, but I love that there's a resource out there. And if they want to connect on a deeper level, they can tweet and you guys can have that conversation. And that's really amazing. Wow. That's a really powerful resource. I'm like so happy I'm speaking to you right now. It's like great. Well, I'm so happy you're speaking to me too, because one of the things you said that I want to highlight is you think that you don't know, but actually you do. Okay. So many male residents, and this happens when I give lectures at Grand Rounds or when in the conference, like so many men, and especially white men, and especially, you kind of become more normal. Well, no, I'm just messing. Yeah. No, it's true though, right? Yeah. So the more normative you are in every column, the less you think you have the right to be an ally to somebody who is not. Right? Yeah. Yeah. So every time I give a lecture, the white male chair raises his hand and says, I'm a champion of this. How can I help? Right? And I'm always like, well, that you've already started to help because I'm standing here giving a lecture on gender equity in medicine or, whatever I'm talking about. Sure. The only way change occurs is for the people in power to actually be champions of change. Right. For now, people like you are the people in power. Now, you're a resident. You don't have so much power. No. But the truth is that it's literally, like, I give a lecture called Stronger Together, Gender Equity in Medicine. And the reason it's Stronger Together is not because I thought that, it was a great theme song to a campaign, but because I do feel that the only way any of these things move forward is if we face them together. So you are as important to this movement as I am. And by having me on the podcast, you've already done something.
Well, thank you.
You should feel good.
I feel great. And actually, to comment on the whole power thing and the resident thing, I do think we do have power. And this is something, we've gone in conversations too, is, in a hierarchical structure that we have, like for better or worse, people who've done something longer, they have more experience. We see them as, ahead of us in some way, right? Which is great, and experience and all those things. But, regardless, like I still have power to really impact medical students. And really impact, people that are, my peers. And so I think, a bigger picture from this conversation is if you're in a position of power and, we have the opportunity to change or affect change, we can do it at any position, anyone, like through the chain, so to speak, and we have that power. So like, I love this. This is awesome. And if you're listening, like you should be inspired. Like if you want to make change, it's time. It's time for you to impact the people you can.
Yeah. And remember that one of the things you can do, like, for example, is if you are on rounds and you have medical students, make sure that you don't engage in benevolent sexism. Make sure that you give opportunities to all your medical students. Make sure that you don't make comments that are somehow offhandedly sexist. Again, it's hard, right? It's exhausting, and it's not easy for any of us. I make those comments.
Yeah, I feel like I've totally done it. Now, like, now that we're thinking about, like, I probably have not done, like, overt sexism, but, like, benevolent. Yeah, I'm sure it's happened at some point.
It has, and it's okay. Like, that's the thing, right? So it's okay to admit it.
Yeah.
And to move forward. Like Esther Chu, who's a really good friend of mine, who's another emergency doctor who's incredible. Yeah. She is a change agent in society, right? Yeah. And she talks about this. Like, we are in the throes of gender and medicine all the time, and we still engage in specifically benevolent sexism frequently. Wow. Both of us. Yeah. Because we are biased. Yeah. Because everybody's a little bit biased. It's the next song in the Play Avenue Q, right? Everybody's a little bit biased. It's okay. Man.
All right. We have to make that song. It has to happen.
I'll call the Lopez's and ask them. They wrote Q. They live around the corner from me.
Wow. So Dr. Dara Kass, we went through like a journey in this conversation, right? We talked a little bit about FemInEM. We talked a little bit about you. We talked about, gender inequalities. We gave some tips for women. What's a takeaway you'd like for people to have from this conversation?
Please. If anyone ever out there is worried about, I don't want to say happiness, because happiness is I don't like that word.
Yeah, that's fine.
It feels like they have no option. Like, one of the things that we have to address overall is our sense of powerlessness as physicians. And the truth is, we have more power than almost anyone else in society, right? We have options to create salary structures for ourselves. We have enormous networks of support. We have at the core jobs that validate us more than almost anyone else. Mm-hmm. The one thing I wanted anyone listening to take away from this, and because it's like the Happy Doc podcast, because this podcast is dedicated to the idea that we're not alone and that there is an element of fulfillment in everything that we do. Yeah. We like this epidemic of residents, specifically women residents, not thinking they have options has to end. And that will end with increased conversation, increased connectedness, actually paying attention to each other, reminding us that we have options, remembering that it's an investment in your future, and understanding that if you reach out, it's not a weakness. Wow. Right? Every single thing we said, because it is gut-wrenching to us who spend so much time thinking about our lives and our happiness and our futures and our families, to watch our younger selves feel powerless. And it is not, we won't let that happen.
Yeah. Wow. That was so powerful. Wow. Beautifully stated. And so I know people listening to this are going to absolutely love your energy. Like, you have so many gems just dropping every sentence.
I drop it. I might drop
it like it's hot. No, but seriously, it's amazing. So how can people connect with you, reach out to you? What are some ways they can do that?
So obviously Twitter is the easy way, right? So anyone can DM me on Twitter at Dara Kass. The FemInEM handle is at FemInEM Tweets. The website is open access for anybody to be a part of. We are pretty open and who can join the FemInEM Facebook group. And the conference, download the podcast. So it's on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, all those platforms.
The name of the podcast is FemInEM?
It's just the FemInEM podcast.
The FemInEM podcast.
Subscribe. It's amazing. And then the last thing is we have a limited number of tickets yet left to the conference in October. I don't know when this podcast is going to air, but I'm assuming it'll be soonest. Yep. So we are working on releasing additional resident tickets soon, which is going to be amazing. But if you go to the website and go to Fix 18, you can see, and if you can't get in this year, you can listen to the podcast later. We release lectures afterwards. So even just to listen to lectures from last year, the thing that's great about it is all these lectures kind of speak to aspects of ourselves that we hadn't acknowledged sometimes. So I think I'm pretty available. And you can always, email me, or even just if you put into info@feminem.org, it'll get to me, and then that's pretty easy.
I love it. Awesome. So, and we're definitely going to put that on our show notes, okay? So people can reach out, through our website as well. Dr. Dara Kass, thank you so much for your time. It's absolutely amazing. You dropped so much knowledge that we're really going to utilize in our daily, work as clinicians. And I'm so thankful for you being here today.
Well, thanks for having me. It was really a lot of fun.
All right. Well, take care. Thank you so much for listening to the Happy Doc podcast, the voice of fulfilled physicians. If you enjoyed the episode, please drop us a like, comment, and share. Share us through the social media channels we have on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The handle is @HappyDocPodcast. That's @HappyDocPodcast. You can find our website at www.thehappydoc.com. Again, thank you so much for listening to the Happy Doc, the voice of fulfilled physicians.